I recently inherited some land from an uncle who suddenly passed away. I never really knew him, but he knew of me, so this was a way for him to kind of making it up to me for being absent from my life. He was a good man and apparently wealthy. He left most of his money to his kids, but he left me a huge property which in the will stayed, "Do as you wish with it," which could have meant selling it, but I decided to hang on to it for a while. I've been back and forth on the land, which stretched a good quarter-mile each way, but there were huge trees surrounding the property. The house itself looked like a plantation house and was a bit run down, but with a little care, it could be salvaged or torn down either way. I decided to use the house and land a bed and breakfast, but would cost a good bundle to get it going, and that's what I did. Took a lot of work on the house, which I did myself, but was well worth it. As a treat for myself and my little family, we were going to spend a week or so in the house and test it out just to see how things would go if we were to open it to the public. Myself, my wife, and my son and youngest daughter. We loved the place, and even the kids loved running around the property, playing on the tire swing I had built, and even cleaned up the little river walk that wasn't too far away. This place was a literal dream after I had gone through it all and fixed things up. Almost tempted to move out there, but the one thing about the area was the trees on the south side. There were these almost blackened trees that were crudely hollowed out, dead and just a bit of an eyesore. But there were more to these trees than I had suspected. One early evening, when walking around the property with my family after having dinner, we ended up just around these trees, and my son was fascinated about them, sticking himself in the hollow ones, seeing which one was best for him and all that. My wife done the same and was curious about them just as much as I was, but my daughter Lily stood a distance from them. You can guess why. Each time I told her to come take a look, she would nod her head and have this weird concerned look on her face, an expression of fear of the trees, which I assured her was okay, but I should have taken her side about it. She started to complain and even start sobbing and bling words that were incomprehensible, not being able to understand why she was upset, and for her sake, we decided to head back to the house. In the late night, everyone was asleep except for myself, as I still had some planning and looking up licensing for the house to be a bed and breakfast. I sat in the study room watching TV, which doing my research, and from out of the corner of my eye, Lily came to me rubbing tears from her eyes, and I gestured her to come over. Softly she sobbed as I held her. "What's wrong, button nose?" As she wipes the tears from her eyes. "Those women from the trees won't stop tapping on my window, and it's keeping me awake." I have her a confused look, and of course I asked, "Women from the trees? What are you talking about?" She rubs her eyes and nuzzles into my chest. "They're scaring me." And not sure why, but I brushed it off as I told her maybe she just had a bad dream. I picked her up and walked her back to her room as she fell asleep in my arms. I laid her down in the bed, and that's when I caught a glimpse of the outside, being on the second floor and the moonlight shining brightly. I see what appeared to be 6 women wearing dresses, walking back into the tree line, which was odd cause there's not another living person for at least a mile, and I wondered what these people were doing on my property. I ran downstairs and out the south door/back door with a flashlight and shined my light around, but didn't see a thing. I had a cold chill run up my spine and the sensation of a hand grabbing my wrist, which made me drop my flashlight. My whole arm went numb for a few seconds and leaned down quickly to pick up my flashlight and ran back inside cause the feeling I just had was something unnatural. For the next few days, Lily had started acting up and behaving strangely, crying and complaining more and more, which was really unlike her. She's usually a calm and happy child, but she kept complaining her head hurt, like someone was constantly pulling her hair and having unexplained bruises. Many times she mentioned the women who she had been seeing were constantly tormenting and scaring her. I kept asking Lily what they looked like, but she wouldn't go into details about it. On our last night of staying in the house, Lily seemed more calm and her usual self, so I chalked it up to over-imagination, but still didn't explain the bruises. As we all turned in for the night after having a game night in the living room while having our supper, my wife and I sat up having a glass of wine. It was just after midnight when we suddenly heard a door slamming upstairs. The father and me kicked in thinking one of the kids were playing around, and I sat up and went stomping upstairs and went into each kid's bedroom to see who was horsing around, but they were sound asleep. I walked down the hall and seen it was the master bedroom that was closed. Maybe the wind shut it a little too hard? I hoped that was the case. Suddenly another door slammed, but this time it was the bathroom, and the window wasn't even open in there. My heart skipped a beat as I turned around, and there was a sudden stomping sound as if someone was charging down the hall in my direction. I jumped back as I turned into my son's room, could feel the stomping underneath my own feet. My wife calls from downstairs. "What hell was that? You all right up there?" I turned the corner and looked down the stairs at her with a frightened look on my face. "What's wrong?" she asks, and again. But this time the stomping comes from right where I was standing and down the stairs at my wife. She screams as she jumps back, feeling the heavy vibration. Then it happened. All the doors on the second floor had started to swing open and closing, slamming heavily, and it started to happen on the main floor as well. My wife scared for her life as I ran into the bedroom and woke the children up from their beds as they seen what was happening. Three of us ran down the stairs while someone or something's, multiple unseen forces running all around the house and banging on the walls, slamming doors, and I swear I could hear multiple voices coming. From the rooms, the lights had begun to flicker wildly, and as soon as we got to the bottom of the stairs, we ran out towards the car. Me and my family stood by the car watching the whole house erupt in a supernatural force, lights flickering and hearing doors slamming. The look of silhouettes running by the windows and evening a piercing scream coming from within the house. We were out and down the road within seconds and never looked back since then. A week later I went and checked on the property with a few friends of mine who also helped with some of the renovations and didn't believe my story, but after seeing the damages, they still remained skeptical but took my word for it. I sold the land a few months later and not sure what happened to the house. Barely making my money back after what I had put into it, but I didn't really care because I didn't want a thing to do with the house. I had done my research about the house and its property, and it turns out the hollow trees, they were used to burn women who were accused of witchcraft back in the witch trials era. 36 women and young girls were burned alive or tied to those trees and left to die all around the property. And those are the women that Lily had been seeing constantly, tapping and whisper at her from the outside. I feel sorry for those women, but it was too much for my family. I hope the new owner researches, or they'll face the same troubles we did. True story. Nearly abducted in Vietnam. I was 25, traveling through Vietnam, and was staying at the cheapest places as I stretched my dollar. This one night, I was staying at a dinky hotel on a very busy party street. I woke one night at 2 a.m. to loud metal banging from the rooftop access door, one floor above us. I got out of bed and went to look through the peephole. As I looked through, I hear the door slam open and 4 men with weapons came in from the right side of my vision. One of them looks back at my door as if he was looking through me. They all turn away from my door and begin kicking in the door across from my door. Mind you, there are only 2 rooms on every floor. I turn around and look for an escape. My room doesn't even have a window. I hide my partner I was traveling with under the bed and slid the TV stand in front of the door. I sat on top of the TV stand and watched through the peephole as they finally break down the door to the room across the hall. I can't help think to myself, I hope we're not next. They all quickly run in and rummage through everything and then return to the hall. They point at my door and begin to walk to my door. One of them walks up and begins to jiggle the locked handle. He suddenly stopped jiggling the handle, then they all went to the elevator and entered it. I sat there looking through the peephole for 5 minutes, then I hear the elevator ding. Then all of them step out again. One of them turns towards my door, then runs up and kicks it. I nearly fall off the TV stand I was sitting on from the impact. I hopped off and braced my back against the TV stand with my feet against the wall parallel. For 5 minutes they take turns kicking the door down with no success. They suddenly stop and head in the elevator again, and off they went. I sat there frozen, ready for them to come again, too afraid to move. Then I hear that elevator ding. I then hear the group of guys return to the hall. This time one of them was talking on the phone as the other jingled something metal around. I hear footsteps up to the door and begins to unlock the door. First key used, unsuccessful. Second key, unsuccessful. As they went through 10 keys, they suddenly stopped. They all returned to the elevator. I sat there still, frozen, listening for another 5 minutes. To my horror, ding. They quickly go to my door and begin working the lock again. As they fiddled the lock, I hear the man getting louder on the phone in Vietnamese, a language I don't know. After a few unsuccessful keys, I hear a car outside blaring their horn. The man on the phone yelled, and they all stopped and went to the elevator, and off they went. I sat there against that TV stand for the rest of the night. I sat there replaying that elevator ding in my head. That ding sound still haunts me today. I was about 7 or 8. At the time, I liked to sleep with my feet facing the wall. One night, it was raining hard and thundering outside. You could literally feel the vibrations of the thunder. I was typically a hard sleeper in my childhood days, but it was so loud that I opened my eyes a little. I just so happened to be facing the window when I slightly woke up. It was pitch black outside. My windows have jalousies and a screen BTW. All of a sudden, there was crack of thunder and lightning. For a split second, which felt like forever, what I saw in the brief flash of light from the lightning was a dark silhouette of a person looking into my window. The two hands gripping the ledge of the window on both sides of what I'm assuming was a half-circle shape of a head. It was not a real person because where their eyes would be were instead two faint white oval-shaped cutouts of the dark shadow just hanging on my window looking inside. Needless to say, I quickly covered myself with my blanket trying to process what I just saw. I did get brave after a few minutes and snuck a peek, but there was nothing there. The next day morning, I went to the back of the house to see how anyone could peek in. I was confused and curious. First of all, there is no ledge to grip on. Secondly, my room window was about 10 feet high. Thirdly, you can't see in because of the jalousies, a crud-covered screen, a light curtain, and let alone at night. I've only ever mentioned this to a few people. I still think about every now and then. I've been debating on sharing this story with anyone outside of my small circle of people that were there. But I want to share my experience in hopes that it saves someone's life or to give understanding of what someone else has experienced. Late fall 2010. In northern Canada, I went deep into the wilderness with my father and my eldest brother to hunt for moose. We left in the early morning, just before sunrise, trying to cover as much distance as possible before nightfall. We traveled winding rivers and had to repeatedly portage over rapids all day. We decided to set up camp just over halfway to our destination. My father figured that we'd make the rest of the journey tomorrow. Well, when everyone bedded down for the night, I decided to go grab some firewood and relieve myself down by the bank of the river, just out of reach of the light from the campfire. Out from the tree line, about 15 yards away, I could hear rustling in the bushes. I watched the area where I heard the noise and focused on that spot. I felt kind of funny, dizzy/lightheaded, and I could smell this putrid stink, like old milk or rotten food. Then I saw the trees start to morph and move ever so slightly and began to take the shape of a head and slight facial features. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness and along the tree line. I could hear this voice coming from there. I recognized it. The voice sounded like one of my relatives who had recently passed. The face took shape of my relative. "Hello," they said. "I've missed you. Come see me." I smiled and stepped forward a bit, but stopped to analyze the situation. My relative's face stopped smiling and became emotionless. The skin began to turn pale and peel away. Chunks of flesh from their cheeks began to fall away, and I felt shock and fear overwhelm my body. I couldn't make sense of it at all, so I started to back away and make my way to camp. I didn't realize at the time that I had been walking towards the voice and I was further away from the firelight. The voice became angry and began shouting at me to come here, so I turned to run away, but as I looked back one more time I saw the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. It was rotting flesh on gnawed bone, caved-in eyes and a hollow chest cavity. This humanoid creature was tall and super thin. I ran as fast as I could, trying to yell for help, but the fear had made my voice quiet and raspy. I ran along the riverbank and I could hear the heavy breaths and the stomping feet from this thing right behind me. I made it onto the top of the riverbank, but it grabbed a hold of my leg as I jumped up. I gripped and tore the grass trying to lift myself and yelled as loud as I could. Then finally my voice came back and I yelled that, "Someone has my leg." My brother woke up and ran over to where I was. Then he pulled me up and took me over to the fire. I was terrified, trying to explain what I saw and that it looked like my relative but not. I was trying to convince them that I wasn't seeing things, but my brother nodded his head and said, "I saw it too. I know." That solidified it. He acknowledged that it was real. We stayed up all night after that, rifles loaded and close by. We packed up when the sun was coming up and went back home. We haven't shared that story with anyone out of fear of being labeled as crazy or liars. I've had nightmares and couldn't sleep for months afterwards. I would see things/dark figures looking into my window or hear whispers when I was walking home at night. Eventually I was seeing this dark figure daily. I went to medicine men/shaman for help, but I've learned that the ceremonies only relieves it temporarily. Friends have given me everything from protection pouches to certain crystals. I found out that there's a strong possibility that I encountered a Wendigo. I learned that if you encounter one and survive, it attaches itself to you like a parasite. I learned that it could only do this if it touches you, which it did. Ever since that night, I've been on edge when I enter any forest or wooded area, which sucks because I loved being outdoors/hunting and in nature. Now I always feel like I need to keep my back against something when I'm out in the wild. Anyways, make your own conclusions about this. I've paid a price for being an ignorant child to the stories of old. They are real, I can attest to that. Stay safe, everyone. My mom used to tell me this encounter when I was younger, and it was always so cool to me. She said this encounter is what made her actually believe in ghosts or spirits. So back in 2006, my mom worked at a nursing home. This nursing home specialized in geriatric care rather than just assisted living. It was around lunchtime, and she and another nurse were moving some residents to the basement where the feeding room was. These residents were incapable of feeding themselves, so the nurses would feed them in that room. This was the original hospital in town, but got repurposed. She brought the first resident down, a blind man that was wheelchair-bound, and wheeled him to his spot. She noticed that 4 chairs were out around a table like a group had been sitting there. Not thinking about it, she puts the chairs up and leaves to bring the next resident. As she got to the elevator, she passed the other nurse with the second resident. This is important for later. Once she has retrieved the third resident, she once again met the nurse at the elevator in the basement. They keep this pace the whole time. My mom wheels the third resident in and sees the chairs back out in the same positions she had found them the first time. She thought it was weird and put them back after she wheeled the resident to their spot. By this point, there were 3 residents who were blind and or wheelchair-bound. She goes back up to get another resident and heads into the basement, passing the nurse as she does so. She walks in and the chairs are back out. She wheels the resident into their spot and puts the chairs back once again. She stands there perplexed for a little longer this time, and so the pace her and the nurse had was broken, and the nurse walked in with another resident. She must have seen the perplexed look on my mom's face and where she was looking. She asks if the chairs were back out around the table. As it turns out, the other nurse had also been putting the chairs up from around the table. Somehow, in a room of disabled people who cannot even lift a spoon on their own, for chairs have been pulled off the stack and into the same positions at the same table. My mom later found out that there was a ghost in the basement named Hank that the other staff are just chill about. He doesn't seem harmful, but his place is that basement feeding room. Interestingly enough, the room was a repurposed morgue/office combo, I believe. The conjoining room still had the autopsy table, but the room had been turned into a storage room by that point. Some time ago, I had decided to go on a little personal vacation out into the woods of northern Arizona. I was experiencing a sort malaise that was really messing with my creative flow, and I needed a chance to really knuckle down and just enjoy the natural world again. I had spent 6 days out in the wilderness, just enjoying the feeling of being in nature, but the night of day 7 was one I will never forget. Noise. Something was waking me up. Groggily, I rolled over and looked at my phone. It was ringing. I looked to the top of it and blinked. No signal. That made sense. I had come out here for the isolation, a chance to clear my head and make some music again. So why was my phone ringing? How was my phone ringing? I stared at the number as my phone rang incessantly. An unknown caller. I heaved a tired sigh, swiped to answer, and croaked blearily, "Hello. You need to be ready. It knows you're there and it's already here. It has come for you." Came the voice on the other line. "Who is this? Who am I speaking to?" I asked, the exhaustion beginning to leave my voice. "Be ready. It will be there soon. Don't open the door." The line went dead. My phone blinked and the words "signal lost" flashed on the screen. "Don't open?" I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and wearily watched my phone, waiting to see if it would ring again. "I must be losing it," I murmured, placing my phone back on the nightstand and rolling back over to go to sleep. That's when the house thundered. Booming knocks shook the glass of the windows and rattled the glassware. Jesus! I spun to the door of my room, and my mouth dropped. My door was closed, but it was shaking like something was trying to get in. Boom, boom, boom. 3 knocks in short succession thundered against my bedroom door. I didn't remember locking it. The only door I locked was the front. It was the only one I figured I needed to out here. The angered knocking came again. 3 strong blows, and the rattling began anew. It shook the door, and as I watched, I saw the frame begin to crack. My phone rang, and the rattling stopped. Sparing a glance, I snatched it off the nightstand and looked at the number. Unknown caller again. Shakily, I swiped to answer the call and brought the phone to my ear, saying nothing. "It knows you're in there. It isn't going to be polite for long. Get under the bed. Hide." Then the line went dead again, signal lost. I looked at the cracking door frame and wasted no time taking this mysterious caller's advice. Quickly, I crawled under the bed and watched. It was only minutes. I knew it was only minutes, but it felt like hours. I stared at the door, terror wrapping its cold arms around my gut. My breathing became ragged as my eyes remained glued to the door. It wasn't moving. There was no knocking. Had the caller been wrong this time? Was it done? Had it just given up? What was it? Questions raced through my skull, each firing out of the cannon of doubt before the next one could be rationalized. Could any of this be rationalized, though? Something had called me up and warned me of something else in my house. Now that something else was just outside my door. I couldn't explain it, but I had this feeling. Like whatever it was that was out there was waiting for me to make a move. Like we were in some kind of terrible chess game. So I watched. I waited beneath that bed for agonizing minutes. The sounds began shortly after that. Soft scratching noises, almost inaudible from my position. The one my signalist savior alleged would keep me safe. I never let my gaze drift from the door, and I'm glad I kept it there because watching what happened next defied logic. The door itself began to bulge inward. I could hear the wood splintering as the center continued to bubble toward me. Then it exploded. Debris and lethal wooden scrap fired throughout the bedroom. I wasn't spared when this happened. My hiding place provided shelter from the brunt of the door's destruction, but I was peppered with fragments of splintered wood that dug themselves into my skin. I wanted to cry out in pain, but the sight of what was beyond caught the scream in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, I saw a pair of feet. Massive legs that must have been at least 3 feet across themselves. But that wasn't the strangest thing. The skin was no tone I had ever seen on a human. It was this mossy green and brown, and the texture was so wooden, like a pair of tree trunks. Slowly, the thing in my doorway ambled its way into my room. I could hear its heavy, ragged breaths, like some sort of hunting beast. It was at the foot of my bed. The scent of moss and pine clung heavily to it. But there was another scent I caught as it just stood there. Rot, death. The pungent odor of decaying meat clung to the creature's wooden legs. I had to cover my nose and mouth to keep from retching as it circled the bed. Was it going to throw it up and pull me out from underneath? Was this monster just waiting for the perfect chance to tear me to shreds? Was it? The feet turned, and suddenly my blood felt like ice. My whole body shivered as the temperature in the room suddenly plummeted. I could see my breath as this thing let out an ear-shattering roar. I can't place the sound, but it reminded me of a mixture between a jet engine's roar and a grizzly bear's growl. I watched from my hiding place as the nightstand was lifted and launched across the room. I could only hear the thing shatter as the creature tore the place apart. My eyes were discs in my head. My hands were clamped over my mouth to hide any sounds of breathing or whimpering. But just as it spun to face the bed, it stopped. Instead, whatever it was turned and shambled out of my room. What the heck? What the heck? They were the only words I could choke out as the creature disappeared from my sight. Then the phone rang again. Terrified, I seized it, trying to silence the ringer. I swiped to answer the caller and immediately began to whisper into the phone. What was that? Who are you? How did you know it was coming? There's no time for any of that. It knows where you are. You need to run. Jump out the window and keep running until you lose sight of this place. Keep going until you reach the highway. Don't come back until morning. Are you kidding me? That thing is huge. I can't outrun it. You have to. It's the only way you win this." Then the call cut out. Signal lost. I steadied my breathing and psyched myself up, shooting out from under the bed as I heard that dreadful roar again. It was coming back. I didn't have time to think. No time to find shoes. I bolted toward the now shattered window and dove, slicing my arms and legs against the shards of glass. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, urging me to ignore everything else. I ran, bolted through the forest as fast as my legs would carry me. Twigs and rocks tore into my feet, but I kept going. Even as my chest began to tighten and my lungs began to feel like they were on fire, I ran. I couldn't hear the monster behind me anymore. Maybe it stayed at my cabin. Maybe it kept looking elsewhere. Every ounce of me just hoped I had gotten lucky. But the voice on the phone told me to keep running until I hit the highway. So I did. I ran through miles of backcountry woods, never stopping, pushing myself far beyond anything I thought I was capable of, just to get away from whatever that thing was. I could see darkness starting to push its way into my vision. My legs were beginning to feel like they were made of stone. My body ached, and every muscle screamed for me to stop, but I kept pushing. When I burst through the tree line onto the road, I stopped. Almost instantly, I began sobbing and dropped to my knees. I gazed up at the moon as my phone began to ring again. I pulled it out of my pocket and looked at the number. Before I could do anything else, darkness overtook me. I woke the following day in a hospital bed. Apparently, someone had discovered my unconscious and bloodied body on the side of the road. The sheriffs had a million questions, none of which I had a good answer for. They thought my story sounded like something I had made up, but when they went to the cabin, many of them were singing a different tune. "It looks like you got lucky and escaped one of the biggest bears I've ever seen," one of them said. "Didn't find it, but the claw marks in the wood made it look like a dinosaur. Grizzlies are huge, son, but not even they leave marks like that." When I asked about the phone calls, they just shook their heads. "There's no cell service that far out. You might have imagined that part in everything." Took me over a week to recover from my injuries. I was told I had lacerated a tendon in my right arm and that it had never quite functioned the way it had before. That was the arm I used to play guitar, and to this day, there are still certain notes my fingers just can't quite nail anymore. The day of my discharge, I was given the things that they had found me with and an escort back to the cabin. The debris was mostly cleaned up by the time I arrived to collect my things, but the damage to the building itself was visible, and the cops were right. Whatever it was that came after me that night must have been massive to leave the marks it did so deep in the wood. I checked my phone as I crossed the threshold of the house to gather my things inside. No signal. "Well, thanks, whoever you were," I muttered, gathering what stuff was left after the attack. To this day, I don't know who called me or what it was that was in that cabin, but frankly, I don't think I want to know. Last night, after trick-or-treating, I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I'm a 42-year-old man for your reference. It was about 10:30, and I was just hanging out watching TV. All of a sudden, boom, 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 boom. Someone was smashing my front door with their fist. I was instantly freaked out. I slunk down to see out the front windows, hiding behind my plants to try and not be seen. I live in a split-level house, so my living room is about 10 foot off the ground. I can't see anybody, but there is a black mid-size SUV in my driveway with its lights and hazards on. Being Halloween and having an active imagination, my mind automatically goes to horror movie scenes. This is when I realized my back patio door is difficult to lock most of the time and is unlocked. I creep into the basement to get a piece of wood to jam it shut. As I'm coming out of the basement, there are two loud bangs on the basement window along the side of my house. Half the basement is above the ground. Remember, it's a split level. I quickly run up, throw the wood to jam the sliding door shut, close the blinds, and creep back up the stairs, turning all the lights off on the way to the living area. As I'm tiptoeing back up and into the living room, I can see the car pulling out of my driveway really, really slow. About an hour later, all seems good and I'm kind of calming down. I'm sitting on my couch with the lights off, watching TV. I see car lights come across my ceiling from pulling up my inclined driveway. I look out and it's the black SUV again. Now I'm really scared. I grab my phone and call 911, thinking I'm about to be in next year's urban legend. I'm on my knees, peering through the plants in my window, just watching. Nobody gets out. I can't see the make or license number because it's so dark. Just a black SUV with lights and hazards on. The SUV was pulled so far forward. Their bumper was practically touching my front step slab, like 4 foot from my front door. Nobody gets out. I can't see in the car. They just sit there. I'm on the phone with 911, telling them what happened earlier and what is happening now. The black SUV slowly reverses out of my driveway and leaves. About 20 minutes later, I see the deputy rolling through our subdivision. The subdivision is one way in, one way out, very small and a little rural. As he's coming back down the road, I see my landlord going out, who lives next door, so I open my door to go out there and tell them both what's going on. When I open the door, there is a note taped to it that says, "Derek, we're going to kill you." I'm not Derek, I don't know a Derek, and I don't know why whoever was banging thinks Derek lives here. I double time to the deputy and landlord and tell them about the note and the other happenings. He calls backup. They take the note, ask both me and my landlord a bunch of questions about who this Derek guy is. One of the deputies pulls me aside and starts asking, "Do I owe anybody money? Do I know anybody that would want to hurt me? Am I involved in any sort of lover's triangle?" No, no, and no. He says there will be a deputy in the area and if anything happens, call 911. The landlord was just going out for mail and swears he has never rented to a Derek. Heard anything, saw anything. Nothing. Here's the really messed up part. This morning I was in my office, which is where that patio door I jammed shut is. It was freezing cold in there. I opened the blinds and the sliding door was about 4-inch open, meaning someone had tried to open the door after I had put the piece of wood in there to jam it shut. I told the landlord he already has a better lock on mine and his patio door and built us both a better door jamb. This is very important, so listen carefully. This text describes the current state of affairs of our small village. The air was quiet, peaceful even. The grass green, the trees tall. I felt free. At least, freer than I had been. I paused. It's been 4 years since the white men came across the sea, since they tortured and captured our people. There are few left in the village now. Some were killed by the white men. Some were killed by a mysterious sickness we can only assume was wrought by the evil white men. Only they might be capable of such a heinous act. After I finish my translation, I look up to see a group of 8 unimpressed scientists. Number 3 was even starting to slump a little. "I thought you said this was important and interesting," said number 5. "All I'm hearing is what we already know. The Indians were decimated when the Spanish landed in Florida." My heart sank. Could they not see it? But why then did they write this down? Ask. Number 7 appears taken aback. "Excuse me?" he asks. I continue. Why would this text be important enough to write down? After all, the Native Americans didn't even record their own gods, much less record them using a concept introduced to them by their oppressors. Number 7 pauses for a second. After a few fleeting seconds, number 1, taking advantage of the sudden silence, rises from her seat. In a commanding, booming voice, she says, "Dr. Thrift provides an interesting point. I call a vote." With that, she turns around, sweeping out the door. The rest of the council soon followed. In reality, I think I know exactly why this was written down. The Spaniards rubbed off on them. They learned a written language, even if they modified it a little. But what actually bothered me? I'm not sure actually. And honestly, I think that makes me even more afraid of what secrets I might find on this ancient tablet. I just have a feeling something on the tablet was important, dangerous, unknown. And yeah, the blood stains probably didn't help. The door opens back up. The 8 council members leave the small chamber known as the voting room. Number 4 remains standing, while the others sit. According to our vote, you will be allowed to continue your investigation and translation of Hamamanachi texts and culture. You have discovered many important things about Hamamanachi, and we thank you, but now you have 10 days, Doctor. Meeting adjourned. Bang! The door slams. All the council men and women have left. I must have gone into a trance. 10 days? That's all the time I have to uncover the secrets and decipher an entire village and language. I leave the room as well. I'm gonna have to start now. On my way out, I pass many men in black, some with their hands on their guns. These men had accompanied many of the members of the council I had just seen. Most council members are extremely high profile. I exit into a van that was waiting for me outside. As I get in, I don't need to tell them where I'm going. It has been pre-planned days in advance. They're taking me to the airport, which I will fly to Hamamanachi, the place I will spend the next 10 days researching. Luckily for me, the plane ride over was extremely smooth. Upon landing, I get straight to work. I pored over everything I already knew. The village was discovered 2 months ago by some free hikers. They managed to recognize the remains of Native American civilization in the area. They immediately reported it to local officials, who reported it to the Smithsonian. They sent me down to investigate the ruins. By the time I had arrived, the houses were torn all over the place. After some investigating, it was determined that a large animal, such as a bear, could have done this type of damage. Likely, it had contracted rabies and attacked the villagers. But I don't know, something feels off. The slashed shelters had anywhere between 1 and 5 tiers. Why would a bear want to attack the tent multiple times? Almost like it was desperate, which it shouldn't be. The woods here are rich in life. I'm probably just digging too deep into it. And yeah, many of the objects and houses had some blood stains on them. Either way, the investigation really picked up 2 days ago when we discovered scripts, likely written by the natives that lived here. Usually, Indians wouldn't write things they couldn't, but the clue was in the language itself. The language was a mixture of Spanish and a few drawings that resembled the environment around them. And that language also revealed something else shocking too. This village wasn't purely Indian. Guessing off the language, it's likely that the villagers were offspring of the Spanish and the captured Native Americans. They must have escaped their Spanish captors and fled into the woods, where they started their own village. The terrain around the village is incredibly interesting as well. There is no surface water for miles around, but what they did have was an open cave system. Last week, we mapped the system using echolocation. Turns out the cave is extremely open, with tunnels spreading for miles. Who knows what's down there? We will in under 9 days. Just as I arrive, another vehicle shows up, another black government-owned van, but this one had a trailer attached. The spelunkers. They were hired to examine the cave system under the village. I walk up to meet them. One of them, the leader I assume, notices and approaches me. We shake hands. "Dr. Thrith?" he asks. "The one and only," I respond. With a quick introduction, he introduces himself and his 3 accomplices, Greg, himself, Fred, Scott, and Kevin. They apparently specialize in open cave safety inspections. Today, however, they will be doing open cave exploration too. But that can wait for tomorrow. Instead of exploring huge cave systems, we're going to eat dinner. Even though the day felt short, the sun was already falling under the horizon, swallowed by the mountains in the distance. Dry leaves and sticks crunch under my feet as I traverse the rough, uneven ground. Within minutes, we reach the tent set up by Christina, our survival expert, who thankfully managed to set up the entire camp by herself in 2 days. If it was me, I'd take 2 days to learn what a tent is. It's like she'd been preparing for this her whole life almost. For dinner, she made a delicious potato soup. After dinner, I naturally didn't go to sleep after that. Instead, I did one of my assigned jobs, translation. As I sit down at my desk, I know what's about to happen, the last page of the recordings of Hamamanachi. I begin reading. I have ordered my citizens to evacuate, but I am not sure how many will leave. Some have lived here their whole lives and are not likely to leave this place. I and large slash is present on the paper at this point. It then continues, I am sorry, I must leave. How cryptic. But that will be another problem for another me. Day 1 that night, my sleep was dreamless. Some say that dreamless sleep is a sign of an unhealthy mind. Some say it's a sign of an unhealthy body. Particularly spiritual folk claim it is a herald of doom to come. But one thing is for certain, it was very unsettling. I woke up in a cold sweat. Usually I have ridiculous lucid dreams. Human-sized cats surfing, talking wolves at the dinner table, and so on. But tonight I had nothing. "Good morning, doctor," Christina says as I walk into the tent. While serving breakfast, she goes on, "The spelunkers came out of their tent around 3:25 to eat breakfast and started exploring that cave." I reply between bites, "Yeah, they are apparently on a tight schedule. I don't think they expected big cave to really mean big cave." After my late breakfast at 11, I set off to the cave entrance. After a while of walking, I saw it, the cliff face wide open. Inside the cavern is a single wide tunnel. This tunnel goes on for hundreds of feet in many directions, with many other equally large tunnels splitting off from it the entire length of the tunnel. Of course, I've never actually entered the caves myself. Our radar scans told us that, but unfortunately, the scans aren't sensitive enough to show us what the cave walls look like. None of the crew present really wanted to go into the cave. For one, caves are often extremely muddy. For two, something about the cave felt unnatural. Like the cave itself was made to be a death trap. I entered the cave for the first time. The air was damp and thick. It smelled somewhere between a corpse and a pottery class. Small lamp lights were set up all the way down the cave. Following the lights, eventually, I finally reached the spelunkers. Dr. Whitney was with them. Dr. Whitney is our resident geologist. She may look and sound like a dumb blonde stereotype, but don't be fooled. She studied for 2 years. She really jumped at the chance to come here. She walks up to me looking really excited. "I haven't seen caves like this since I was in school. This tunnel was dug." Startled, I reply, "What? Ho dash, look at these markings." She continues, rushing to a cave wall, shining her flashlight on it, running her hand across the wall. "These marks are faint, probably from water erosion, but it is definitely evident of excavation." I respond, if to get her off my back more than anything else. Interesting. Moving on, I walk up to the caving crew as they begin excavating a wall that looks different. This one wasn't smooth like the other walls, but gravely, almost like a cave-in was blocking the way forward. As I walked up, he turned toward me. "Hey Doc, any idea what this says?" He ushers me over toward a rock embedded into a wall of the cave. "Wait, no, a tablet." I start the translation process as the team continues excavating. Luckily, it wasn't very difficult. The language was basically just an extremely stylized version of Spanish. The only real difference, really, is that every letter is warped to look like a creature, a mix of language and art. The only real difficult thing is that each time something is written in the language, it's written a different way. One letter may resemble a bear. The same letter may be a badger. Here lies the remaining Skinwalkers. The disease will destroy everything. The Spelunker team leader looks up seemingly unimpressed. Nice prophecy. Want to see what's behind this wall they don't want us to find? Really? I retort. Seems like they didn't want us to find Rab. Stop him now! I yell, but it was too late. The walls come crumbling down. Get out! I yell, evacuate immediately. The evacuation was almost like a 3-step process. First came the confusion. The entire chamber pauses, a calm before the storm. Then the chaos. Everyone begins running. Some even began screaming. All the equipment was left where they were. Then, after the entire cavern was evacuated, came the final stage, the questions. So, why did we leave all the equipment? I didn't even look back to see who asked. The tablet says they trapped the disease in that cavern. If that's true, then that means that chamber is likely contaminated with whatever killed the villagers. We can't be sure what the disease is. My best guess is rabies, and if that chamber is filled with rabies, I don't want anyone getting close to the place. Get Richard over here, he's our disease expert, right? Suddenly, the sun shifts in the sky. The world darkens. The ground rises to meet my face. When I woke up, it must have been late. The sun was already approaching the horizon. finally awake. Standing just above me was him, Dr. Will. 2 hours, he said. He must have seen the confused look on my face, because he elaborates, "How long you were out for?" Sitting up, I realized that everyone else was beginning to rise as well. Something else I noticed, a small crate. "What's in the box?" Opening the box, he takes out a pristine white radiation suit. Can never be too careful. Christina insisted that I have these taken here when she learned about the caves. Taking the radiation suit, I turn around. We need to get back into those caves to figure out what we're dealing with. Is it empty? The chamber was entirely empty. Sure, there was a shallow lake in the middle of the chamber, but there was nothing else in the chamber. No vegetation, no cave fish, no cave anything. And while it may seem contradictory, the most worrying part was that there weren't any bodies. Not even skeletons. The tablet specified remaining skinwalkers. I assumed they meant infected individuals, but now, I'm not too sure. What did they trap here? I turn around. Let's go. It's late and there is nothing here for us right now. But Dr. Will says, this place has remained untouched for literal centuries. Are you sure we should just dash? We can wait till tomorrow. I snap. The room goes silent. After my ears start ringing, I begin to crack. Listen, it's been a strange day, and this room is starting to chill me. Through the corridor caves we traveled, but the chilling feeling only got worse and worse until we were outside. The snow starts falling. Not good. I start speeding up from a walk to a jog. Until, Doc, why'd we stop? I think someone is dead. Something was lying there, dead. It was black with frostbite. It was just curled up in the middle of the path. A dark blotch amidst a sea of blinding white. What is it? Almost like the voices had activated the creature, it slowly unfurled its legs, using the thin, malnourished limbs to raise itself off the ground. It was humanoid in appearance, but no one could mistake it to be human. It was black, with malnourished limbs and skin clinging to bone in its abdomen. Its fingers ended in long claws, and its head was looking in the wrong direction. It was 180 degrees in the wrong direction. Slowly, it turns its head. Only one thing, its body didn't move with it. Its face was skeletal, decrepit, and as it turned toward us, I could feel my skin warm, while the air around us freezes. Hypothermia. The world falls out of focus as the creature dissolves in the cold wind. Day 7, waking up on the morning of the 60th day of the investigation. A couple things occurred to me. One was that I was knocked out twice in the same day, and 2, that I somehow knew I was out for 6 days. Then I realized where I was. I was in the Spelunkers' van. The van had been converted into a sort of infirmary. In the back were the beds. 3 were strapped to both walls, with 3 more laying across the floor. Everyone seemed to be there, everyone except Christina. Did she do all of this? She was the only one who didn't go into the cave, and she did convince Dr. Will to bring those full exclusion suits. The cave, the suits. The realization hit me dead on. That thing, the zombie spirit apparition, was it real? Looking over to the front of the van, there appeared to be a load of assorted first aid items neatly placed across the floor of the van. The windows were also completely blacked out. Groggily, the others begin to rise, all looking just as confused as I was. After a brief recap, the group confirms that, yes, the thing that attacked us wasn't imagined. After a quick vote, 5 were in favor of leaving, while 3, including myself, voted to stay put. Exiting the vehicle, the air was filled with quiet murmurs. The area surrounding the van had been made into a temporary fort using all the various tents and some extra materials that I hadn't seen previously. The surrounding forest was a cold, almost lifeless husk of what it had been before. The trees were leafless. The ground was covered in pristine, white snow. No animals moved in the trees, but we knew in some primal, instinctive part of our brains that there was something out there and that it could end us very easily, and worse, it wanted to. Dredging out into the forest, the entire group must have walked for 15 minutes before Drive Whitney stops. "Did you hear that?" she asked. The group stops in its tracks. The sounds of the forest, natural and unnatural, are all that can be heard in the air. The wind in the trees, the chirping of the few birds who dare remain, the soft crunch of snow underfoot. I turn around, quicker than I'd ever turned before. What I saw terrified me. Just behind Dr. Whitney, almost touching her, was the thing, standing silently, with its terrible face looking directly away from me, while its body was ready, poised to attack. Thinking back to the moment, only one thing of the situation truly stood out to me: the fear on her face. Up until this point, she hadn't frowned once. In fact, it was almost uncanny sometimes, how much she smiled. But now, all there was fear. Run! Now! I yell. This time, no one stopped to question me. Even while running, the forest was nearly silent. No creature noises, no monsters that we could hear, and no screaming. At least no one was screaming, not until it came back. Almost 10 minutes later, while resting near a newly frozen creek, they returned. Tea started with my heartbeat. My heartbeat, roaring in my ears, louder than anything else. Correction, almost everything else. Suddenly, a scream echoes through the forest. It must have found us. But the thing that had grabbed Fred was more terrifying than it was before. It was almost 7 feet tall, but its hands and its head had something familiar: 2 wide blue eyes and a single strand of yellow-white hair. It wasn't the original one. Another scream sounds from behind me. The group scatters, running in almost every direction. All except one, Dr. Will, who had stayed behind, frozen with fear, or perhaps disbelief. Maybe both. What did I do next? The heroic thing and arm myself? The smart thing and go back to the camp-turned fort? No, I fled. I tried to hide. But clearly it must not have been very effective, because at sundown that evening, someone found me. Day 8 at breakfast the next morning. It actually came as a great surprise when, out of nowhere, someone new appeared. After Christina found me last night, I left to go to bed early, or at least tried to. But waking up in the morning, I saw someone who I'd never expected to see here. Tamaya Northwest, expert in Native American lore and professor, otherwise known to you as Number 1, the person who called for me to have more time exploring these cursed ruins. One long explanation later, it turns out that the both of them have relations to this very village, and according to them, this place was abandoned after the monsters in those caves were trapped there by a small group of villagers, sealing the cave from the inside with all of the creatures in there. The few survivors were forced to move because the monsters scared off all of the wildlife, and their water source was sealed. They traveled for years. No tribe accepted them, believing their presence would bring the beasts to them, but eventually they met with a French expedition. They were able to travel with them for much of their trip before breaking off, eventually settling with the Navajo tribe. Their tales changed, slowly formed from the disease that wiped out the settlement in these woods, to stories of corrupted witches, changing shape into whatever form suits them. And those tales of monsters in the woods, they almost disappeared entirely. But when Tamaya had learned of this place, she had started researching, and she uncovered the original story of this place, and contacted her cousin, who? Christina. Unfortunately, the records of how they killed the things have been all destroyed. All except for one clue: the color brown. We haven't been able to figure out what the color is meant to signify, but it did come with this text. Tamaya unfolds the crinkled picture of an old dusty script, revealing text written in the old Hamamanachi language. After 2 minutes of translation, the text is revealed. Beast's Bane? The words echoed through the forest, almost like the forest wanted us to know it was important. That brown color, it looks almost familiar. Christina started. It can't be the trees. It doesn't make sense for forest creatures to be weak to the trees. Maybe fire? I ask. The paper may be degraded. That could have been orange like fire. It's worth a shot, said Tamaya. Just then, the ground started to shake violently. Earthquake? Yelled Tamaya. No, it can't be. We're hundreds of miles away from the nearest fault line. I yell back. Christina joins in. Well, I don't think this area was marked for zombie risk either. Get to the campfire. We all quickly run to the campfire. The fire starts shaking. Log starts rolling off the fire, surrounded by dry leaves, and then nothing. The quake stopped, and the world returned to the eerie stillness and anticipation it had held before. Then the van disappeared. Suddenly, I remembered. something. "Look at these markings," she had said. "These marks are faint, probably from water erosion, but it is definitely evident from excavation. They're below us," I yell. Just then something rises from where the van used to be. Not something. It was them. The infected. First was one I hadn't seen before. This one was smaller, it was four-legged, and it looked almost dog-like, with a rotted snout. Then came the white-haired one, then the one that destroyed our lives, then more came. One that looked oddly human, one that was on fire? Thinking quickly, Christina had thrown a flaming stick from the fire into the crowd of zombie-like creatures slowly making their way to us. The fire spread quickly, engulfing every creature in flame, all the way back to the hole, and to the van. The fire kept burning, that is, until it wasn't. The fire suddenly goes out with a gust of wind. The fire hadn't worked, what would? Boom. The van explodes, causing one of the things to go flying into the trees on the other side of the hole they dug into the camp. It might have been funny if they weren't so dangerous. But now, no place is safe anymore. That being said, there was now only one place I could think of to go. Day 9 that night, we slept in the trees. It took much longer than I would like to admit to find the cave. In the 7 days I'd been asleep, the beasts had managed to remove all of the trail markers and paths we had set up, including the lights in the cave. So finding the cave, or burrow more like, and navigating it had been unnecessarily difficult, even though we'd already been here over 2 months. I breathed a massive sigh of relief as the cave that reminded me too much of a mouth came into view. We passed into the cave, barely talking throughout the journey. For last night we had decided only to talk when we needed to. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from speaking when we found the place that served as the plague's prison. I never in a million years wanted to see this place again. This is where we had to make our stand. The cave rumbled. They were starting to close in. I had to think. I had to. Brown. What about that color could stop these things? Why did it look familiar? Turning around, I look into the cave. We had to figure this out quickly. If we don't, when the team comes to check on the operation, this infection is going to be much worse. This cave had somehow trapped them before. How could it do that when these guys can dig so quickly? They dug out these tunnels. How did a small cave contain them? And more importantly, could they do it again? It had been hours. The shaking had stopped for who knows how long, and that could only mean one thing. They were inside. We are starving, limited battery in our flashlights, and surrounded by creatures that aren't even in the nightmares of the human race. This cave had kept them contained for years. What made this cave so different? Is the wall shining? The words caught me off guard. I hadn't actually heard anyone speak since last night. But Tamaya was right. The walls appeared to be shining with a very interesting color. "Are the walls here made of copper?" asked. Christina responds, "I don't know. You're the scientist." The tablet marking the entrance of the chamber clatters to the floor. Walking over to examine it, I had a feeling that the beast's bane was really hiding under our noses this entire time. This is what they're after. My voice echoes through the cave. This is what kills them. It's copper. They've been after the copper this entire time. That's why I was the one who survived. I hadn't had any electronics on me when they found us in the woods. The cavers had their backpacks full of equipment. The others had their phones. I explained. "But why did it take so long for them to get to the site then?" someone asked. "We don't know how far their territory expands, do we? Maybe they got to a campsite or sites with more copper than there was in the van." "He's right," said Tamaya. "Copper being their weakness is the only reason that they could have been trapped here for 3 centuries. Grab some rocks from the walls. We stop them here, or die trying." Within hours, the unlikely team had turned from prisoners into a militia, armed only with a wide array of primal copper spears. They were more like long, sharp stones. By what we assumed to be nightfall, the creatures still hadn't made a move. Then, by what we assumed to be midnight, we made a decision and a plan. To escape the tunnels. We left our devices in the cave carrying only our spears and moved down the tunnels. Multiple new tunnels had appeared since our departure, each one likely dug by the infected legion. By the time we were at the end of the cave, it was midnight exactly, and a full moon lit up the sky. But even as we rose to the surface, we could feel their presence. Emerging at the top, the entrance was surrounded by a wide ring of infected. There must have been 30 individuals, a far cry from the 9 people who discovered the cave. Upon seeing us, the original one, the one in the middle, made a terrible screeching sound. And by terrible sound, it was barely recognizable as human, if the thing ever was human to begin with. It was dry, like it hadn't touched water for millennia, but it also sounded like chalk scraping on a whiteboard. In seconds, the group was upon us, the only thing keeping them back, the spears we were pointing at them. Just according to plan, we back up into the cave. As suspected, the lesser versions of the creature were following us. At about 3 a.m., they were right where we wanted them. Make a run for it! We bolt down the hall, just barely ahead of the creatures as they chased us. Then, just as they were about to get us, we were there. The water chamber, gilded with copper. The first 3 creatures screamed in pain as they entered the room. They tried backing up as their hands melt into the floor, but the other 26 creatures in there with us were also moving too. By the time they had stopped, only 10 of the creatures remained. They weren't there for long though. In seconds, we used our spears to destroy the remaining creatures. And then there was one. Crack. Hours later, we would have reached the entrance, or we would have, if not for the fact it had been closed off. The original must have blocked the entrance while we killed its underlings. But luckily, we weren't actually going there. We were already up. We took one of the many connecting tunnels dug by the Legion, leaving IT defenseless when it attacked us for our copper spears. To think how quickly the tides turned. One day we were only alive because it thought we were funny, and the next day we killed it with sharp rocks. And so, as the sun rose, the nightmare was over. How long had it been since I ate? I was hungry, very hungry. I'm gonna go eat a cheeseburger now. Goodbye.